The first step to dealing with a problem is to first identify it. See, these problems are not identified on a micro and a macro scale because the same way a child won't deal with themselves because they haven't fully grown up yet. Or a better example would be a narcissist who can't deal with their narcissistic behavior because it's so much a part of their character, their beingness. They can't differentiate between their disease and who they are at their core. On a macro scale, this has taken over what we call the human character. And the defense mechanism for not changing is the accepted norm of, you can see this happening when you get into conversations with so-called white people about colonialism and everything. This happened just recently to where somebody asked me, like, it started off with because I had my hair down. I was like, oh, your hair is so nice. Like, where are you from? Are you from somewhere exotic? Like this whole exotic thing. Like, initially you'll see that immediately puts you somewhere else, as if they're supposed to be here. Like, I'm natural to this land. You're exotic. No. This is how the original people looked. This is how the original hair looked. So this is kind of like a narcissist does all these little passive aggressive things. And I'm not saying that most people do this consciously. This is happening unconsciously because it's ingrained in the way that we interact. It's accepted. It's put in movies, it's put in music, it's put on the news, that's how it's accepted. And you can see how the algorithms of Netflix creates this acceptability of certain actions between people. So these conversations just get mirrored in the individuals, and then those individuals pass those characteristics on to their future generations and so on, and that's how it carries on. What I'm saying is that these accepted norms are what is maintaining these accepted diseases. And these diseases are not being identified. So these diseases, since they're not being identified, will not be addressed and healed. And the defense mechanisms that are inherent with our everyday ideas of ourselves, our character, all the way up until the definitions of humanity. This is why the idea of science, which a lot of people go into mainstream science, will really go into it with their own eyes, see it as a religion, see it as scientism. See, science on the whole is the balance between what the non-physical and the physical, the spirit and true science. Ancient cultures were aware of this, like Egypt and the Mayan interpretations of reality overall with time and so on and so forth. This is why those civilizations cannot be accepted as any kind of intelligence when holding up the idea of modern intelligence. So the skeletal structure of that, what holds it all together, are the beliefs in stuff like the Big Bang, the origins of leading into evolution, and then coming from monkeys, and then monkeys creating technology with turning into humans, and then humans creating technology, and then going to space. That whole accepted identity, that whole characteristic, is another separator from us realizing our disease, us identifying the diseases. And the lack of identification, since people are, this is how people like sick people or people who have been abused for so long create another identity. The other identity that we are accepting is this belief in the idea of modern technology and modern humanity is the evolutionary peak of our existence. And there's no questioning that. That's why you have this superpower, this idea of the superpower of science and the pompous, arrogant character of people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, who Their word is unquestionable. They are actually worse than a preacher of a religious doctrine, because the congregation for modern scientism, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, their congregation is humanity itself. So that gives them the identity, that gives them the power, just like the kings and the queens of the old had the power to, send Spain and Portugal to different places and go conquer it. They got power from God at that time through the church. Today, these nations get power from the God of science and modern technology and the evolution through the belief systems of evolution. They get it through the superpower of science. And that can be easily traced to the biggest guns. They can just bomb everybody because of their belief systems, and that's what's accepted. See, this is why it's so important to go into realizing that in order to gain your power back, you have to separate yourself from the false empowerment programs that are out there. And you can't do that by just saying, "Oh, I'm separate from it." See, that's what a lot of these other kind of like cheap, I don't want to say artificial power groups, I want to say like cheap power groups, these communities that are building themselves up as powerful simply because they're a community. There is power in community, but that doesn't mean that that's a powerful community. If that community has the same limitations as the individuals who created that community, then that community is only going to go as far as the individuals, their belief systems in that space, and what they are communing around. So since we are no less than two steps separated from the identity of ourselves, the identity of our true empowerment, in that in between step, so you have one step, two step, in that step, it's kind of like a buffer. You can't see yourself. So that in between step is where the modern belief systems utilize the space of our own belief systems to work against ourselves. So they install all of these theoretical ideas of who and what we are. And since we're two steps separated, the individuals, the intelligence that's only one step separated, can manipulate the masses who are two steps separated. This is why athletes and actors and politicians, they have to be separated from the masses with money, and because they are in the know, they are the illuminated ones. So this is why you don't have individuals on that space talking, having deep conversations with the masses or really expanding the program. You have one or two here and there, but even they can go so far. And if they go too far, they'll be either taken out or removed from the overall conversation. Or they'll put some kind of case on them in some kind of way to basically silence them. Because it's the intelligence that's the power. It's not the money, because if you have intelligence, you can get money and then you can get power. But it's the intelligence that presupposes anything that is powerful. So this is why you had the Black Panthers. They were intelligent. So they had created a power with their intelligence and didn't need all that money. They were supported by the community, and that's why they were seen as a threat to the biggest superpower in the whole world, and they were systematically taken down. Back to this two-step separation, this is how it happened in the recent years with Donald Trump. Donald Trump came out with this idea. He was pushed into the system as basically they were pushing him because he was different. He was not a regular politician, so they knew they can get 4 years out of him. They can get 4 years out of an entertainer, because politics is entertainment anyway, and everybody's on social media. He was a Twitter freak at that time, so still is now. So they knew they had at least 4 years, because the buffer zone between anybody doing anything is separated even more so with modern technology and social media. So like I've been saying about politics for a while now, is that it's an up and down strategy, to where this is the duality system of the Democrats and the Republicans. They can treat you like shit because this is an abusive relationship with your slave master. They can treat you like shit as long as they don't treat you like shit for the next 4 years. Since they didn't treat you like shit for the last 4 years, now they can treat you like shit for another 4 years or, 8 years or whatever. And they can expand that based upon the atmosphere of how people have been interacting. Like I've said in previous videos, that was not an election process. All of it's a selection process. So this is what gets me so much so many times is that people follow all these politics because they think they have a power. But as soon as you start asking them about like the wars that are created, the wars that send your sons and daughters and brothers and sisters to war, they're all created and set up by the same government who's doing this political process, but people really believe and think that they vote in, like they have a say in who's their next slave master. Like, so you're aware of the inconsistencies of stuff like 9/11. You're aware of the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. You're aware of all the shit that was going on with the Civil War. You're aware of all these other wars, and even the war on drugs. All these drugs that are put into the community, inner city communities, the weapons that are put in the inner city communities, the attacks that are sponsored by this government system. This is why I said this is a sickness, this is a disease, this is an insanity, to where the only power that people can rally around is the power that has been created by their slave masters, because their identity was also created by their slave masters. So whenever there's an opportunity to have any kind of power, they'll jump on it, and there'll be like a block, like a blackout. Like I said, I'll go back to somebody who's been kidnapped. They completely, in the Stockholm syndrome, their only identity, their only connection to who they think they are and know themselves as is what the kidnapper has created for them. So what happens is that in order to be completely enveloped in that space for survival purposes, they have to black out the people that they used to be before they were enslaved or kidnapped or whatever. This is what's happening on a macro scale. How this is maintained on a macro scale is that people are constantly updating their belief systems of enslavement. And those belief systems of enslavement are evolving based upon the evolution of consciousness that's happening within the individuals, that is mirrored on the macro scale and is now happening even faster on social media. Just because it's happening faster on social media doesn't mean that it's more organic or it's better, because at the same time, these false belief systems and these enslavement belief systems are also evolving at the same time. So they can push things on you like all these smart things, these smart IDs and the 5G. And since you need so much and you need it faster, that need creates an opening to where these slave masters can install more programs, like more spam, more viruses into your update program. Just imagine, like back in the day, you didn't have that many updates because the computer software was just so simple. But nowadays, since everything is changing so fast, you need more and more updates. Well, in that download program, you're going to be more susceptible to more viruses. And since those viruses have an intelligence behind them, people can install more viruses into your program. That's happening both on a technology basis and on a psychological basis, and even on a physical basis. Look at all the genetically modified viruses and foods that are being sent into your future generations right now. Fast food is another example of this. It makes you sicker quicker. The same way the speeding up of technology makes you psychologically and so on and so forth sicker quicker. These app-based entertainment programs are another version of that. Back in the day, like I said before, they can only install viruses as fast as the newspaper can get out to you. Then after that, as fast as the radio could get out to you. Then after that, as fast as the TV could get it out to you over air. Then cable, then the internet. Now you have, within the internet, you have social media. So just as fast as Facebook and Twitter, Snapchat, they can get that out to you quicker and quicker. And meanwhile, they also have the other programs like cable TV, and so on and so forth, still running to maintain their installation programs over the older generations. The most recent update that was installed with the Trump program was this idea of Make America Great Again. Since people don't know what America is in the first place, they don't know who they are. They know, as an American, they don't know what that is. They don't know what was great, and because they don't have, it's basically a punking program. Because if you're not with Making America Great Again, you're anti-American, and it's worse to be anti-American because you're outside of the accepted norm. Like, you're not part of the mass consciousness. You're not part of the crew. So what mainstream so-called white people have been doing during this process is they've just been, keeping low and blending in with the system, just saying, I'm not like them. This is a way to categorize, to divide and conquer even more so white people. And then, since white people have been the leaders of thought in the recent years, the people who have less than zero identity are just going to follow the so-called white people. So this is why you have people throwing parties and celebrating in the street for their next white slave master, another old white man. And even though they know all the information, they've read books about Malcolm X, they know what happened to Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all of our leaders. They know that this system has taken our leaders out. Their identity is more enveloped in being a part of the status quo of group thought, of sheeple thought, because that is what maintains your survival. Your basic human needs are enveloped up in this accepted insanity program. So how it played out basically was that Make America Great Again was put out there 4 years ago in order to make acceptable the identity of Make America Better Again. So Make America Great Again, under the toupee of a racist piece of shit like Donald Trump, was put out there to set the bar so damn low that when 4 years later, people are going to be chomping at the bit to just have something better. So when that something better is presented, they can do anything. They can tell you you're not black if you don't vote for me. And people will do that. They'll vote for that person because at least he's not a piece of shit. Like, it's a piece of bird shit instead of a piece of dog shit. And since those are your only two options that have been given to you by your slave master, then that's when they got you. And since this is a psychological mind control program that's existing on a massive scale, it needs to be the prep work for that needs to be for a certain amount of years. Like I said, treat you good, treat you like shit. Treat you good, treat you like shit. Treat you good, treat you like shit. And you can go back in the years and see how this has been going on. Through just my observation in my short life, I've realized this with Bill Clinton. People were accepting him because I remember when I was a kid, I saw Bill Clinton on Arsenio, and I was like, what is this? Like, I like Arsenio, and am I supposed to like this dude? He's playing a saxophone and shit, like. So that, as a kid, that gets in your head, and then you carry that on into the future, and you don't know anything about what the Clintons have been doing over the years. All the people that they put in jail, all of our people that they put in jail, all of the shit that they did in Haiti, like all this shit that's going on, you don't know anything about it. But what's in your beingness of the relationship that you have with the Clintons is he was on Arsenio, So they get co-signed by people who that we connect with. This is why they always activate their celebrities out there for during the election process, during the election time frame. So you have all these people that you identify with. You can't disagree with them because they put this atmosphere out there, they put this identity out there, and if you don't think like them, if you don't act like them, even if what they're doing and saying is insane, if you're not like them, then you're not a part of the crew. And if you're not a part of the crew, you must be a part of this crew. This is how they play everybody against each other. So like I said, this is how they said that this is what Trump represented, no different than, going from Clinton to Bush and then Bush to Obama and then Obama to Trump. So it's just this up and down idea of involved change, but it's actually a manipulated move towards a deeper enslavement. So right now you have people who have voted for Biden thinking that the election process is legit, and people celebrating now because the tone has been for 4 years, both on TV and in life, on the streets and on social media, it's been low, low, low. Now they can produce this artificial high, high, high. And they only have so many people to choose from. So you're going to have slip ups like Biden saying, you ain't black if you don't vote for me, bro, and all this other shit out there. And people will just be like, did he really say that? Oh, at least he's not a piece of dog shit like Trump. And so yeah, so that's how it's played out. Make America Great Again was only put out there to have people 4 years later begging for Make America Better Again. And they didn't have to, they just had to spend 4 years, ignoring what Make America Great Again means. And you'll see people there, you ask them, when was America actually great? Like, what greatness are you speaking of? What is this greatness? Like, what time frame are you talking about? How are we going to be great? No, they're just saying great as in what? Great as in, if you really go deep into it, you'll see great actually represented like the greatness of so-called white superiority. Even taking out the racial connection to that so-called white superiority into from the perspective of that being directly related to the superiority of modern thought. So modern science, modern technology, that's connected through Donald Trump being a businessman, which business is connected to technology, and business and technology connected to the so-called evolution of modern humanity. So their greatness, when you really boil it down, they're talking about, if you just take away the racism from it, their greatness, because that's also you can see from the people who are actually talking about greatness, who are racist, that's what they actually mean. The great Make America Great Again Make America Great Again means make America like accepted, like white acceptance as, the boss. Make the white boss great again. But if you want to just take the racism completely out of it, the masses who aren't, racist, what they're celebrating at that time, and even what they're celebrating now, this is what Biden still represents, the same idea. Make America Great Again is the same thing as Make America Better Again. What's happening today is the idea, the accepted evolution of, what's cool. Like, we're America number one. Why? Oh, because we have Hollywood and science and Neil deGrasse Tyson and the democracy and freedom and all this shit. Like, that's what they think Biden represents as Make America Great Again. So he's just another version of Make America Great Again. But how it was sold to the masses is Make America Better Again, because America, and this is North America again, in the United States, not even North America, the United States of America. Because that's another mind control program, is to lump America up into this tiny identity that is the United States as a superpower. No, America is more complex than that. We are more connected than that. We are a completely different being when you see America as America. When you see America from Chile, all the way from Argentina, all the way up through South America and Central America, the United States into Canada, all the way up to those dark skinned Eskimos that are up there, up into Alaska. America, that kind of America is a different kind of America compared to Trump's, following of America. No, they use that as a rallying cry, but when you really boil it down, this is another part of the insanity. You really want to talk about that Turtle Island, the indigenous peoples of this land. It immediately takes the power away, because you'll see, this is why I said back in the beginning, the Mayans and the ancient indigenous civilizations that had an intelligence that surpassed today's modern technology. That's why they can't say anything about how Machu Picchu was built, how Sacsayhuaman was built, how the pyramids were built, how structures in Mexico and Central America, they can't say how those things were built. They have to act like it doesn't exist in order to have people following their idea of, I almost said Orwellian evolution, but it's actually just the monkey evolution. So in this evolution, you have to have control over certain generations. You have to have on a macro scale and different versions of that. So this is why narcissism is installed as a personality trait into entire generations of people. So you'll have like these baby boomers who can't let go of modern politics. They can't let go of modern technology and modern scientism. That's a part of who they are. And the same way, like, older generations think that they're better than younger generations because they lived life longer, but there's no richness there. They didn't have any like life lessons. They just lived. They just survived up into a certain point, and because society cherishes that and celebrates that, then that creates this narcissistic identity that actually keeps progress from happening. So narcissism is then accepted as a social norm in society. That narcissism adds into why things aren't looked at and dealt with, because if you look at and deal with those situations, then that's forcing people to look at and deal with themselves. And if people are going to look at and deal with themselves, is going to take away their power. In order to maintain their power, they're going to avoid those situations and those conversations. And that's how the power maintains on all the different fronts. So people who are accepting the modern norm, the social norms of, like, they agree with the way society has evolved to today, they have to protect that, because if they don't protect that, that's going to be like not protecting themselves, not protecting their family. So protecting the belief systems is an inherent need as a way to protect their future generations. So you had to have mobilized and arm. So the army that has been armed with this particular identity are so-called white people, who have that. White is not an identity. It's not a nationality. It's not anything like that. So in order to maintain their acceptance as a whole throughout the world, which is power, they have to protect their empire. And this is another thing that I was thinking when I was driving the other day. I was like, and you can't even speak about, like, there's even a hesitation to me talking about, so using the terms white and all that other stuff, because that army gets crazy. And not even talking about white people, like non-white people are actually more aggressive against people like me who speak about this stuff, to defend that bullshit, to defend their ignorance in this conversation. And that's what I'm saying. We need to have this conversation in order to deal with the diseases that are accepted as a social norm as a whole, on a micro scale and a macro scale. These identity belief systems are criminal. It's a criminal act. So their belief systems, their lack of identity adds up to belief systems that are actually making this empire evolve itself at the expense of the rest of the world. So the army that has been mobilized against the rest of the world is this identity that's not all white, but it is centered around this identity of whiteness, which is why you have dark-skinned people bleaching their skin. Like, is that a human thing to be doing, or is that a psychological program that has been installed into the macro consciousness that makes people react that way? See, that is a disease. That is actually more of a threat to society than these viruses that are out there. People bleaching their skin and all that other stuff. Why aren't we, we up in arms about that shit going on? No, because that is part of the overall, the macro control grid. So that army that has been mobilized is centered around a particular group called so-called white people. And it's so accepted out there and so defended against, even on a subconscious level, that they can tell you that there is something as such as the black vote, the black community, but and deal and talk about the black community and the black vote in reference to their politics, but you can't say the white establishment. There's a black. They can tell you in your face that there's a black vote, there's a black this, and there's a black that. But as soon as you say the white empire, the white establishment, you're wrong. You can't say that. That's a no-no. So how the fuck can we have a black vote, but you don't have a white empire? The fuck out of here. So this is held up by, like I've said in previous videos, the criminalizing. So this is just like you can have a black vote, but you can't say that there's a white establishment. It's the same way that's in the same ballpark as people accepting the idea of black people being, violent, and this is why the conversation of black on black crime is always thrown into the mix without understanding the infrastructure of creating so-called black on black crime, like installing of drugs, installing of guns, that creates a space. It's like throwing everybody into this daycare, and in this one daycare, you have caring people that are teaching and raising these children in healthy environments. In another daycare, you have these abusive caretakers who are installing guns and psychological programs and treating these ones different than these ones, and they know about this other daycare, and they're making them fight and instigating them in their whole time, and then they're saying like, oh well, look at how violent they are. And these ones are not that violent, you know what I'm saying? So how the fuck could you have a so-called black on black crime conversation when that situation is going on and not even talk about that situation first? Like, how can that go on? But since people are so subconsciously and unconsciously enveloped in defending this program, their inner whiteness, their inner identity that's connected to the idea of so-called white superiority, they can allow themselves to go into those conversations, because that will start to bring about a change in them and their ideas of themselves that they don't want to deal with. So in order to separate themselves from that change, they have to celebrate and build themselves up in this other idea of greatness, which is right now is Democrats celebrating the selection of Joe Biden, as if it's different than anything else that's been out there. Another example of stuff like that to keep people in that insane kind of back and forth space is stuff like you'll see billboards. Like I said, the TV, the newspaper, the radio, the internet, social media, all that stuff maintains stuff. We have stuff like billboards, big ass billboards on the street. These are all things when you drive by, they're just flashing and hooking your mind and the mind of your children. Your children are getting hit with all of these things. I saw a billboard on the way up here from Arizona to California that said, "Had enough, vote Republican." This is no different than those big ass, like this, something's going to be different first of all, but this is no different than those big ass Christian billboards that use guilt. So this is another version. Like, you can see how this whole thing traces back to narcissism again. They use certain manipulating your emotional responses, just like a child. Like a shitty parent is going to use manipulation to raise their children. A good parent is going to use care and understanding and different forms of that aren't manipulative, that aren't going to play with the emotions of children. They're going to use healthier ways to raise their children. So on a massive scale, you don't have good parents, you don't have good leaders, you don't have healthy parents, you don't have healthy leaders. You have these manipulative assholes who are using emotional psychological programs to adjust the tensions and the ideas of forward progress on a massive scale. So you'll see, like, when you really get into conversation with these so-called Democrats, they right now the celebration is they don't want ignorant so-called white people in charge. They just want, but they still want so-called white people in charge. They want that identity in charge. And this is not because, people are just overall just fucked up people. Like, it's because that conditioning has been existing in people for so long, generations upon generations. And then you just soak people for so long they just get fed up, and then they have a lack of options and then dive into this because they don't have anything else. So to take it a step even further, what's happening behind the scenes of this modern politics is you have what's been mobilized with the Trump groups of people and has been activated even more so that the fuel has been put in there, is this idea of conspiracy theory. And conspiracy theory that has been connected to a lot of truth. Obviously, when you research this stuff, what's called conspiracy theory, which was a term created by the CIA, this term conspiracy theory has been activated as a power cell for this. Is obviously connected with Trump talking about fake news and the real news. This created this rally point of people who don't have anything to hold on to. So in order to avoid the identity of being unified around racism with Donald Trump, they have this idea of being unified around conspiracy with Donald Trump. This is why Donald Trump created that relationship with Alex Jones in the beginning, to set off the rally point of people surrounding around Donald Trump with conspiracy theory, because they have nothing else. There's no greatness that they can surround themselves by. See, the Make America Great Again dealt with the ignorant, the deep ignorant ass people who are just on one level very racist and just want to maintain the whiteness of the United States. And then you had, in the in-between space, you had the people who just follow Alex Jones, and like they'll follow that identity. The so-called Republicans, they'll follow that. It's like groups of people, so you go from like I say, the mainstream has the mainstream media, and then they have the Young Turks, and then they have our aggressive progressives, and then our progressives and aggressive progressives, and then all these sections of people. Same thing happens on the Republican side. You have people who just want to follow Trump because Trump, and then you have people who want to follow him because Make America Great Again. They don't know what that means or why. Then you have people following him because he was connected with Alex Jones. Then you have people following him because he's connected with CueAnon, and this is a deeper space. And in that whole relationship, over time, you have people evolving from that step one all the way in through all those steps to other ones over time. Right now, what a lot of people aren't realizing, and I mentioned this before, is that CueAnon is put out there as this mainstream version of conspiracy theories. So the QAnon information that's out there is basically, it's the same kind of, it's in the same category as like Black Lives Matter for what's happened to the indigenous people around the world. Like, is Black Lives Matter dealing with the definition of racism? Is Black Lives Matter dealing with the colonial mind control program around the world? No, Black Lives Matter has a specific thing that it focuses on, and it's still centered around accepting a lot of the things that are adding up to the destruction, the intelligent destruction put out by this system, and the self-destruction that's happening within the individuals that have been conditioned over time to self-destruct because of this so-called black and white identity. So you have these people calling themselves, this is another reason why they put this out there, the QBs, the CueAnon, they put this out there to have a rallying point, to have something to feed themselves with. This is what politics does on a massive scale. They need something to feed themselves with. So QAnon covers the basis for the groups of people who are just really lazy. They need somebody to, or something to put together conspiracy theory information because they don't want to do the work themselves, but they don't want to have an identity behind it. They don't want to say that because if it's any race, then people will focus on that individual. This is why the QAnon invisibility cloak is so effective, is because it's not an individual person, it's a group of information, that people are following. So they can hide behind that and then not say that it's a white conspiracy theory information or an information stream. It's just an information stream. It's not, it's not centered on that. But when you really dig into it, they're not talking about the deeper programs that led up to the root structure problems of today. They'll never go into that. So this is this is that ignorant space that people who are ultimately, they don't have the time or the inclination to go in there, like I said before, because they'll start to have to look at themselves. They'll start to have to look at themselves on a deeper level, and they don't want to do that. So QAnon is the Black Lives Matter of conspiracy theory and empowerment. So people empower themselves around the idea of QAnon, but they're not really empowering themselves around the identity of themselves, because they have no identity. Their identity is just another created identity, and this unified identity through information, but up to a certain point. So this is why you have people empowering themselves so much so on the political scene, to where they're saying, where there are Trump supporters going out talking to Biden supporters saying, you support Trump supporters saying to Democrats, you support pedophilia, you support pedophiles. Like that, they have that secret information. It's secret information that empowers them now, and now it creates another mobilization unit, to where it makes this conversation of politics even more important. Like it makes it more realistic. And since the mainstream media never talks about this stuff, and you have people celebrating that, and they are connected to that, now it creates this thing that there's a difference, that Republicans are now different from Democrats, and that, the politicians on the Republican side are not connected to the pedophilia and all that other stuff. So, well, how the fuck did that happen? Well, because QAnon is connected to Trump, and Trump and the Republicans are, unveiling this stuff. So just because they're saying a lot of this stuff as being existing on the under, they're making it seem like they're not a part of that group. And since people don't want to see the connection in that, because they'll have to see that their leaders and all that other bullshit is actually a part of that shit, since they don't want to see that, because they'll have to look at themselves on a deeper level, they'll share the information and start to attack other people with that, limited frame of thought. And then, they'll focus their forward progress, their movement, on an individual. So they'll mobilize around Trump. And the only way they could have got they got masses of people to mobilize around Trump, is if they started to release a little bit of information about that undercover shit that's going on. So they say the Illuminati and the people who are a part of these pedophilia rings and all that other stuff, that you can see the Epstein stuff that's going on, and people are being put in jail and all this other stuff. That's the Democrats. It's not the Republicans. They separate themselves. This, on a long run, can go into, setting up this idea of a civil war, and it'll be like, these are the not pedophile groups of people who still want America to be America again, and then the other groups who are just going along with the accepted identity of mainstream group thought. So that camaraderie of QAnon, it envelops the individuals who are accepting that identity now. And in that envelopment of those people who take on that identity, you keep yourself from the deeper storylines, and you actually push the next agenda without even knowing it. So now you'll see in these next months and years, you'll see this is the celebration mode, and you'll have people celebrating change and all that other stuff. And whereas before people were loud and getting all messed up about Trump's tweets and people making fun of him on the mainstream media, now you'll have people controlled with silence. They'll seemingly have nothing to talk about, the same way Obama silenced people for 8 years. Biden will silence people for another 4 to 8 years. And in that silencing, they'll actually do more harm and push more agendas than before. So now, since people are in that celebration mode, they're in that positive reinforcement mode. And because you had negative reinforcement with Trump, now you have positive reinforcement with Biden. You'll actually be able to push more of your agenda because there's no separation between the two. You'll be able to push more of the agenda even harder. This is why you had, when Obama was in office, you had so many more bombs and so many more programs that were pushed. Same thing that happened with Clinton. How many people, how many of our brothers and sisters and uncles and family members were put in jail under Bill Clinton, with Joe Biden, by the way. But yeah, it's just a bunch of bullshit.